Sorry? Oh, okay.
The world already changed.
Oh, yeah. Since this article.
Since the last week.
Yeah. How's everybody today? Good? Sorry I'm so late. It's, it was pouring rain, so I drove my car, and then the traffic was going very, very slow from Beitwin up to here. So anyhow, glad I made it, and glad you're all here. It seemed very quiet downstairs today at the library, so I guess maybe the rain is keeping people away too. So anyhow, I know that many of you are probably wanting to look at this big talk about tariffs. That's been the big discussion here in Taiwan and everywhere else recently. So I thought we'd probably look at some articles, maybe one or two articles about that, and then we'll see if we have time to talk about anything else. So anyhow, this is on the front page today, but it was interesting because I believe that I was reading some other news that Donald Trump has suspended tariffs on many countries, but not China. I don't think he's suspended any tariffs on China yet. So, so anyhow, let's read this, and then hopefully we can see some new words, because this is something that I'm sure will be in the news a lot, not just now, but in the future. So it's good to know some English vocabulary words and know what they mean, and see if we have any questions. So anyhow, here the headline says, China imposes 84% tariffs on U.S. imports. Okay, now we know the word tariff, right? What is tariff, just to remind yourself? Yeah, so everybody knows that word now. Donald Trump says he loves the word, he loves tariffs, okay? So why don't we say it together, tariff. Tariff. Now just remember, tariff is a very specific word. It's not a word like, I know every year we all have to pay taxes, right? But those are not called tariffs. Tariffs are a kind of tax, but they're not the kind of taxes that we pay. These are taxes that usually countries pay on imports from other countries. Okay, so impose, we've talked about this before. This word impose means to do what? To put on, right? So what do we impose? Besides taxes, what else do we impose? What? The law, right? So the government has the authority to impose certain laws, right? So if I'm driving here and I'm driving 100 kilometers per hour in Taichung, and the police stop me, it's because they have imposed a law on speeding, about speeding. I can't go that fast. What else do we impose? Okay, sanctions, curfews. We could impose a fine, right? If I'm driving too fast and the police stop me, they might impose a fine on me for driving, for speeding, okay? So he said sanctions, sanctions are like when one country limits what another country can do, usually with trade, with Maoyi, they put a sanction on that company. Maybe they say, we won't trade with you, or we won't buy certain things from you, or you cannot sell certain things. A sanction. He mentioned another word, curfew, right? What's a curfew? Right, so you're not allowed to go out after a certain time, or some people might say you have to be in by a certain time. So your parents can impose a curfew on you when you were a child. Maybe if you were not, if they were concerned about you staying out too late, they could say, okay, we're going to impose a 9 o'clock curfew. You have to be home by 9 o'clock, or something like that. So this is a word we can use a lot. So why don't we say that word, curfew? Curfew. Impose. Impose. Now, I've told you this before. I'm sure you probably remember, but to impose also means if you impose on someone, what does that mean? Yeah, you bother them. You interfere with something they're doing. So if someone wants to interrupt you, let's say you're doing something, you're working on something, and one of your colleagues comes up to you and says, sorry to impose, but I need to ask you a question. Or sorry to impose, but could I ask you a favor? So to impose means to also ask a favor, or no, sorry, not to ask, but to bother or trouble someone. Sometimes people might say, sorry to trouble you, sorry to bother you, sorry to impose on you, or to impose, okay? So this is a good word to use. So here, of course, we're not talking about bothering, we're talking about taxes. So they impose an 84% tariff on U.S. imports. So then it says trade war. U.S. President Donald Trump said the other countries were quote unquote, these are his words, of course, because we have quotations. They were dying to make a deal with Washington, adding that these countries, and this is his quote, these countries are calling us up kissing my ass. Okay. Yeah, he said that, which I guess, that sounds like Donald Trump, but this is not considered a very nice word usually, but what does this word mean? What does that mean? Yeah, like you're a pigu, right? Okay. So, but actually the word, it's funny, the word actually has a completely different meaning. Does anyone know what else it means? A donkey. Yeah, it's like a donkey. How do you say donkey in Chinese? Yeah. So it's an actual word for donkey, and it's a normal word. It's not a bad word. So if it's very funny, like if you read some old versions of the Bible, for example, Shenjing, they use the word ass to describe a donkey. But now they've changed that word. They've taken it out and they've changed it to donkey because a lot of people think this word doesn't sound very good. It doesn't sound pleasant. Yeah. Show? His reality TV show.
You are the boss now.
Mm-hmm.
People around you kiss your ass.
Right. So what does everybody know what this actually means? So I mean, obviously they're not really doing that, but what does that really mean? Yeah, so basically if you're trying to make somebody like you, or you want to make them like you, especially someone who's higher than you, and you're doing everything you can to make them you're often, I would say, the word that we often use, and this is a good word, I don't think we've ever learned this, but what is to flatter? What does flatter mean? Okay. So flattery is a 名词, and to flatter is a 动词. So if you flatter somebody, the problem with flatter is, he said to give someone lots of compliments, but sometimes the idea of flattery means that it's not always true. It's too much, right? Let's say you meet your boss and your boss walks in the door and you're like, oh, you look so good today. You look so wonderful. I love your suit. And oh yeah, you're just putting out all these compliments, and we call that flattery. Now, I think sometimes you can flatter somebody and it's maybe true. I mean, you really believe that. But I think flattery often has the idea of you're doing these things, but it's a little bit not completely true, or it's a little bit false. So flattery, I mean, sometimes flattery can be used in a positive way. Maybe your friend is feeling really down and they're feeling really bad and really depressed, and you decide to flatter them a little bit, to say some nice things about them. But I'll say this word can be used in other ways too. Like, for example, if someone is wearing some clothing and it makes them look good, you can say those clothes flatter you. And that means that those clothes actually make you look good, or they make you look better. Or this is very flattering often we say for women, this outfit is very flattering to her figure, right? It makes her look good. Okay. So this is a word that we can also use in other ways to describe something that makes something, it kind of makes it look better or good. Okay. But it's a good word. It's a common word. So why don't we say together, flatter, to flatter, flattery, flattery. Okay, so there's many sayings that have to go with expressions. Like one expression that I just thought of is if someone's trying to kiss your butt basically, and you could say flattery will get you nowhere. Okay, that's an expression. It means it doesn't matter how much you flatter me, it's not going to help things. It's not going to get you any benefit from me. So that's a common expression. Flattery will get you nowhere, or will get you nothing, basically. Doesn't matter what you say, I'm not going to give you any favors, I'm not going to like you more, I'm not going to do anything better. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It just basically means I don't care about you, get out of here. It doesn't mean that, actually. That's actually a different meaning. It just means I don't care what you think. Get out of here. Basically, that means basically beat me up, to beat me. But it doesn't necessarily mean to beat me up like physically, but if I was defeated very seriously, okay? So I was very happy. I didn't actually get as much sleep as I should have last night because my favorite 足球队 really beat another 足球队 badly. I support a British team called Arsenal, and they beat Real Madrid, which is a very famous team, right? They beat them 3-0. So you could use that expression to describe what they did to the other team. So yeah, so anyhow, I'm not suggesting that you use this expression. It doesn't sound very polite. It doesn't have a very sophisticated sound to it. It's not the kind of language that I would promote. But if you hear somebody saying this, you know what it means, okay? And just remember, sometimes if you read some really, really older English, it actually means donkey. So it doesn't mean, yeah, okay. Okay. Actually a word that a lot of people would use, this word doesn't sound really good, but a lot of people, this word's a little bit more acceptable. Some people might just say, my butt. Butt means the same thing. It's this, but it doesn't sound quite as bad, right? You could say he's just trying to kiss my butt, or he kicked my butt, meaning he beat me very badly. That sounds a little bit better than that word, but yeah, anyhow. Okay, let's go on there here. It says China is to impose 84% tariffs on U.S. imports, up from 34%, the Chinese Ministry of Finance said yesterday, hours after similar levies by the U.S. came into force. Now, here's another word. What does levy mean? It's also tax. Now, levy could be any kind of tax. It's not a word that we use too much, but I'll tell you, this word comes from a 动词. We just talked about the word to impose taxes, right? We can use this word as a 动词. It's L-E-V-Y. L-E-V-Y means to levy a tax. It means to collect a tax or to put on a tax on something. So we can actually use this word as a verb also, and we can say to levy, okay? So the government is going to levy a new tax on everyone, okay? We can use it that way. It means to impose a new tax, okay? So let's read that together, to levy. To levy. And then this is a means, levies. Levies. Okay, so the U.S., these similar levies, these similar tariffs came into force, meaning that they are active. They're actually being used right now. Okay, so let's read this. China is to impose 84% tariffs on U.S. imports, up from 34%. The Chinese Ministry of Finance, let's say it one more time, Ministry of Finance said yesterday, hours after similar levies by the U.S. came into force. Okay, so let's go on here. It says, U.S. President Donald Trump's latest salvo of tariffs came into effect on dozens of trading partners, including punishing 104% duties on imports of Chinese products. Okay, now here's a word, it's kind of unusual, but salvo. This is a military word, actually. Does anyone know what a salvo is? Yeah, it's like that's a good word. It's like when you shoot many guns at the same time, you fire. I'll give you a picture in your mind. You've probably seen like really old war movies from or movies about old wars from like 100, 200 years ago. It's very interesting. At that time, all the soldiers would line up in a line and they would all shoot at the same time, right? They would just stand there and all fire at the same time at the enemy. We would call that a salvo, okay? And so when everyone fires at the same time, it's called a salvo, or it could be a bigger gun. But he just had a word actually that is called a barrage, okay? And it's the same kind of idea. It's when you fire or many things are shot at the same time. We can say there was a barrage or a salvo. So, of course, here we're not talking about real shooting, right? But if you can say a salvo of tariffs, it means it was almost like the tariffs are like an attack, right? So they're shooting a whole bunch of these at the same time. So it's that idea of firing many guns at the same time, many shots at the same time. And so we have a barrage or salvo, either one of these words we could use, okay? Now, I'll tell you, this word can be used in other ways too. For example, a salvo of, if you're arguing with somebody and there's a salvo of insults, right? Or someone attacks you verbally, right? You can say, I received a salvo of nasty emails from people who were not happy with me. Let's say a bunch of people are not happy and they email you or they send you messages and to attack you. We can say a salvo or a barrage of emails, okay? I guess it doesn't always have to be negative. If you just receive a whole bunch of these messages at one time, and they're coming at you, like they're almost like they're coming at you at the same time, we could say a salvo of messages, okay? So does everybody understand what I mean? Okay, yeah. We would not normally say a barrage of flattery because flattery already has that idea of being a lot of something. So I don't think we have to add the word salvo or barrage, okay? So anyhow, let's say this word first, salvo. Salvo. And then this word is kind of interesting. It's kind of a French belief. This last word here, this G is pronounced with a J sound, right? So we say barrage. Okay, so it's this accent is on the second syllable. So barrage. Barrage. Okay, so barrage, right? So you can get a barrage or you can use this as a 动词. You can say we barraged the enemy, or I barraged him with questions. Okay, that would actually be a very good example. Let's say you have a ton of many questions that you want to ask somebody suddenly, and so you throw all these questions at them at the same time. You can say I barraged him with questions, or let's say you received that. I received a barrage of questions from him. Okay, many questions suddenly coming in at the same time. Okay, so it's a good word to know. Okay, so here he says Donald Trump's latest salvo of tariffs came into effect. Again, this is it's now in effect. It's effective. It's being used on dozens of trading partners, including punishing 104% duties. Now, here's another word. You know, we keep seeing these different words for taxes, right? We had levies. We had what was the other word? Tariffs, duties. Okay. So import duty, I'm sure when you come to the airport in Taoyuan, in Taipei, you see there's a duty-free shop, right? So that means you can buy imported products and there's no duty on them. Okay, so this is another word that's very similar. But here it says punishing. If something is punishing, what does that mean? Does it, and I want to ask you a specific question. Does it mean that you are being punished, or what does it actually mean? It's harsh. I think that's probably a good word. It means it hurts me. It's damaging. But it doesn't, again, it's not exactly, it doesn't necessarily mean something is punishing you, but it means it's difficult. It's harsh. Okay, I'll give you a very good example. Let's say you decide to go out and run a marathon. Okay, I don't know if any of you are runners, but you know, running a marathon is very, very punishing, right? Why? It's not because you're being punished, but because it's very difficult. You have to run for all this many kilometers, and it's difficult. Maybe it's hot. Or I'll give you another example. You know, today it's very rainy, so it's not that way. But let's say tomorrow the temperature is 37 degrees. We call that punishing heat. Okay, the heat was punishing today. It means it's very harsh. It makes me feel very, you know, it's punishing me, but not in a way that's not like we normally use punish. Does everybody understand that? So we could talk about punishing heat, a punishing race, a punishing, it doesn't mean that I'm being punished, okay? So it just means it's painful. It's harsh, it's difficult, okay? So let's say it word together, punishing. Punishing. Okay, so let's read this together. U.S. President Donald Trump's latest salvo, let's say it again, latest salvo of tariffs came into effect on dozens of trading partners, including punishing 104% duties on imports of Chinese products. Okay. So then it says here, Beijing has consistently opposed tariff increases and said that it would take firm and forceful steps to protect its interests. Okay, what does consistent mean? It means unchanging. It always remains the same, okay? So if you are a very consistent person, usually that's a good thing, right? If you can say he's very consistent in his work, it means you or consistent in finishing his work. Now, consistent could also be used for anything, right? For example, you might say that Doug is consistently late for this class, right? So yeah, that would be another way of putting it. But if you are consistent in something, it means you do it. But often the word consistent can have a very positive meaning. So someone who's stable, they're consistent. They don't change too much, okay? So why don't we say it together? Consistent. Consistent. And then as a 副词, consistently. Consistently. So it's consistently opposed tariff increases, okay? And it will take firm and forceful steps to protect its interests. Okay, so let's read this. Beijing has consistently opposed tariff increases and said that it would take firm and forceful steps to protect its interests. Okay. Okay. So anyhow, it says its finance minister later said in a statement that additional tariff rates on imports originating in the U.S. would rise from 34% to 84% effective from 12:01 p.m. today. A p.m., that would be noontime. So I guess it's today at noon, not a.m. A.m. is midnight. Okay, that's we don't have to read that paragraph. Let's go on to this paragraph. It says the tariff escalation against China by the United States simply piles mistakes on top of mistakes and severely infringes on China's legitimate rights and interests, the ministry said. Okay, so we've talked about this word together before. To escalate means what? What would be a simple word for escalate? To increase. Yeah, okay. So you could say to rise as well. For example, we could say they escalated the conflict between them. Okay, they increased it. They escalated the taxes. Or you could say there is escalating trouble between those two countries. Or you could say, the amount of rain every year is escalating. Okay, so I don't know. This word can be used in many ways: a rise, an increase, to rise or to increase. We've talked about it before. If you go, not in this building, but if you go to like a 百货公司, often there's an escalator, right? You stand on it and it takes you up. The funny thing is an escalator also goes down, which doesn't make sense. But anyhow, we still call it an escalator. It can go up or down, but escalate means to go up. I think probably because originally it was to help carry people up, but it also carries people down. So why don't we say it together? To escalate. To escalate. Escalation. Escalation. Okay, so the tariff rate, basically what this means is a tariff increase or raise. The tariff increases against China by the United States simply piles mistakes on top of mistakes. Okay, so this is actually an expression. You can say pile on something, pile something on top of something else. You could say this is piling more problems on top of other problems. This is piling more work on top of other work. Okay, so here it says this is piling more mistakes or mistakes on top of mistakes. What does to pile mean? To stack, right? Let's say you have some clothes you want to throw in the washing machine, and you put them in a pile, or you pile them on top of each other. Or you have some dirty dishes and you wash your dishes, but you're not ready yet. So you pile the dishes on top of each other on your counter. Okay, so pile means to. He said the word stack. We sometimes use that to stack something. Means to put things on top of other things, right? To stack them. Or to pile them. I think pile often has a more of a stack seems a slightly more organized, like there's actually a stack, whereas a pile can just be a bunch of stuff lying on the ground, okay, or piled up. It doesn't have to be stacked. Stack is more like you stack something that's flat, like books or papers or something like that, files, and you stack them. But pile can be a 动词 or a 名词. You can say there's a pile of garbage outside my house, or you could say I piled the garbage outside my house. Okay, so either way. So why don't we say together pile, pile, and then that word over there, stack, stack. Okay, so it says here it piles something on top of. It means that you're just making the pile bigger and bigger. Pile, whatever on top of whatever. Okay, so piles mistakes on top of mistakes. And severely, of course, means seriously, right? Severely, seriously, infringes on China's legitimate rights. Now, we've talked about the word again, but we'll review it. What is legitimate? It means legal, but it also can mean something that is, usually it means legal, but it means like something that I have the right to, right? What we say are legitimate rights. Well, here in Taiwan, we think our right is to freedom, right? Or to vote or to elect our president or something like that. Those are legitimate rights. We have the right to own our own property and all those things. Some people say the right of freedom of speech, okay? So legitimate, this is a word, but what's the opposite of legitimate? Illegitimate, okay? So we add an I-L-L, so it's two L's, I-L-L, and then the rest of the word. So I-L-L-E-G-I-T and so on. Dung dung. So we say illegitimate. Okay, so why don't we say this word together? Legitimate. Legitimate. And then the opposite, illegitimate. Illegitimate. I think I've talked about this before, but not in Taiwan, anywhere. If someone has an illegitimate child, usually it means a child that was born to them outside of marriage. Like maybe someone has an affair and then they have another child that's not legally their child. It's so we call that an illegitimate. So sometimes we might say that person is an illegitimate son of so and so. Okay, so it's that word legally is used in many different ways. So it severely infringes on it. And infringe, we've talked about before, I think. What is to infringe on something? To violate. Yeah. Like we can violate a law, right? Like I said earlier, if I'm driving too fast in my car, I violate the speeding law, right? But we could also say to infringe on a law or to infringe on somebody's rights. It means to break or to violate or to go against, okay? So, we have the word violate or to infringe. Like, for example, copyrights. You know what a copyright is? If you write a book or you write a song and somebody steals that from you or uses it without your right, we say that infringes on my intellectual rights or my property. You've taken something from me without my permission. So that's called to infringe or to violate something. Now, infringe can also be turned into a 名词. We say infringement. Okay? So I-N-F-R-I-N-G-E-M-E-N-T. Infringement. So you can say there was an infringement on the law. Okay? So why don't we say this together? Infringe. Infringe. Infringement. Infringement. Okay, so they're saying that these tariffs seriously infringe or violate China's legitimate rights. Okay, so I just want to add something. When we say infringe, often we say to infringe on something, infringe on his rights. But violate, we just say to violate whatever, to violate the law. Okay, so anyhow, let's read this together. The tariff escalation against China by the United States simply piles mistakes on top of mistakes and severely infringes on China's legitimate rights and interests, the ministry said. Okay. Okay. So it says here, Washington's moves severely damaged the multilateral rules-based trade system, it added. In a separate statement, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce said it would blacklist 6 U.S. artificial intelligence firms, including Shield AI Inc. and Sierra Nevada Corporation or Corp. Yeah, so anyhow. So let's see here. It says Washington's moves severely damaged the multilateral. What would be another way of saying this, multilateral? Many-sided, yeah, many sides. We've talked about this more than once. If there's just 2 sides, what do we say? Bilateral, bilateral. What if there's 3 sides? Trilateral, right? And then we have multilateral. I don't think we say quadrilateral. We can only say bilateral, trilateral. What if it's just one? There's no other side. Unilateral, unilateral. So if you do something unilaterally, it means you're not working with anyone else. You're just doing it on your own. Okay, yeah. We say multilateral. Yeah, so basically more than 3 would be multilateral. It just means many sides, okay? So why don't we say it together, multilateral. Multilateral. And let's review those other words. One side is unilateral. Unilateral. 2 sides, bilateral. Bilateral. And then finally, trilateral. Trilateral. Okay, so it says that they're violating this multilateral rules-based trade system. And then here's a word I don't know, we've talked about this before. I think we have. What does to blacklist mean? This is used here as a verb, but it can also be a noun. I know in Chinese, I think they say, what is it? 黑名单, right? Okay. So basically, if you blacklist somebody, it says you cannot work with them, or you can't do business with them, or they're not welcome here, or something like that, right? I have a friend who was blacklisted from China. He was not allowed to enter China anymore because of the government didn't like what he was doing in China. So he was not allowed to come back into China. So I know that Taiwan actually just blacklisted a couple influencers because they said they violated some working laws in Taiwan. I think it was a little bit too much, but anyhow. But yeah, so why don't we say together, blacklist. Blacklist. Okay, so usually this word, you could say they are on a blacklist, but this word is often used as a verb, 动词, to blacklist someone, or here it's a company, okay, or companies, okay? So these are AI companies. Yeah, okay. So let's read this. Washington's moves severely damaged the multilateral rules-based trade system. It added. Okay. In a separate statement, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce Commerce said it would blacklist 6 U.S. artificial intelligence firms. Let's say it one more time. Artificial intelligence firms, including Shield AI Inc. and Sierra Nevada Corp. What does Corp stand for? Incorporation, right? And Inc. stands for what? Incorporated. What does incorporated mean? It means you are what? If your company is incorporated, what does that mean? No, it's actually simpler than that. To incorporate is a 动词. It means to register your company, right? Your company has been officially registered as a company, right? Now, if I to incorporate, like you know, if let's say you want to start a company, a new company, you have to incorporate it, right? You have to register your company with the government, probably somewhere, to say that we are a legal company. So to be incorporated means that we are a legally registered company. Okay, so that's just simply what it means. So why don't we say together, incorporate? Incorporate. So that's a 动词. But this word Inc. is often attached to names to show that, you know, this company is a legal firm. It's a legal business to incorporate something. Yeah, I think it's corporate person. I think that's the word we can use. It's a company, but it's legally represented as a person. Yeah, so that would be like legal person, I think, or legal, yeah. I'm not sure the exact term. Yeah. Yeah, corporate person. I think that's the correct term. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Often we say, you know, I know we talk about legal person, right? A legal, someone who, yeah, anyhow, it's a little bit complicated. I'm not a lawyer. Okay, so anyhow, I think you've got the main idea for this article. We can go to a different article. I want to look at a different article that comes at it from a more specific Taiwanese perspective. Any questions about this before we move on? Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. He is what? So, right. Well, AmCham Taiwan, or AmCham, is a very global organization. They have a lot of influence. So, you know, every year they issue their Baipishu, you know, and they go to Washington, D.C., and they talk to the U.S. government about promoting trade and business between Taiwan and the United States. So I do think if AmCham, I'm not saying AmCham Taiwan is going to change everybody's mind, but I do think they have influence in the U.S. government and in the U.S. Congress. So if they say, well, you know, this isn't good for American businesses or whatever, yeah, I think it helps. You know, yeah. I don't know if it will change anything, but it helps, I think. Yeah. So, yeah. Any other questions? Anything else before we go on? The second story I want to look at is actually related to this story. Whoops. So we can, I'm sure we'll still be looking at some similar ideas. Okay. So let's go on here. Okay, so here we have our former mayor of Taichung, who is now our foreign minister, and I know that he's probably been very busy recently with this whole issue. And I heard a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that he actually went to Washington, D.C. to talk to the U.S. government. Okay, so it says here, U.S. open to tariff talks. Lin, of course, this is Lin Jialong. It says, first step here, a task force is to meet with officials in the U.S. to discuss not only tariffs, but investments and purchases of U.S. natural gas, the foreign minister said. Okay, that's Lin Jialong. Okay, so a first step. This is the first process. A task force, we could say a team. A task force, you know, what do they call it? In Chinese, they say a xiao, small group, like a, yeah, something like that. Yeah, right. Because what is a task? What does task mean? Yeah, it's a job. It's an assignment, right? When you're a child, your parents probably gave you tasks to do around the house, right? And of course, your teachers always gave you certain tasks. You know, there are things that they want you to do. So a task force is like a team, like he said, that has a specific assignment or a job. Okay, so task, I guess maybe a close word would be assignment. You know, your teacher likes to give you assignments, right? But your parents can also give you assignments. So we say task. Okay, so why don't we say together, task force. Task force. Now remember, a task can be used as a verb too. You can say he was tasked with this job. It means he was given this job to do. Okay, he is tasked with this responsibility. It means he's been given this responsibility. Okay, so it can be used as a verb or a noun. Okay, so a task force is to meet with officials in the U.S. to discuss tariffs and investments and purchases of U.S. natural gas. We've talked about this before. What's natural gas? I think we say LNG, right? Yeah, liquid natural gas, basically. Liquid means they take the gas and they turn it into liquid form for transportation. But we say, if you see the word LNG, it stands for liquid natural gas, okay? So yeah, it's 天然瓦斯, right? Yeah, okay, so yeah, same way of saying it. Okay, so let's see what he says. It says the U.S. is willing to discuss tariffs with Taiwan and has asked Taipei to provide more information on the issue, Minister of Foreign Affairs Lin Jialong said yesterday. Okay, so I guess that's good. Let's read this together then. The U.S. is willing to discuss tariffs with Taiwan and has asked Taipei to provide more information on the issue. Minister of Foreign Affairs Lin Jialong said yesterday. Okay, so let's go on. It says the U.S. on Wednesday last week announced reciprocal tariffs against multiple nations worldwide, including a 32% tax on Taiwanese goods. Now, there's a word here that's very important. I think we've talked about this before, but what does reciprocal mean? It means that it matches. It's like a matching. Okay, so let me give you an example. If this word can be used as a 动词 even, right? So we can say to reciprocate. Okay, so if you reciprocate, okay, to reciprocate. So let's say, for example, your friend helps you with something, right? And then you reciprocate by helping them with something. Basically, I'm doing the same thing that you are doing. Okay? It's like matching whatever you do. Okay? So, so I think you all understand this idea, right? To reciprocate. Huh? Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's usually good, but I guess it could be bad. Yeah, I mean, I guess it could be bad. If someone hurt you and you reciprocate by hurting them, right? So it could be bad or good. It could be either way. Yeah. You go. Yeah, but let's say someone hurt you and you reciprocated by hurting them. Yeah, but I think it's a neutral word. So I think it can mean that basically you do the same thing. I mean, obviously reciprocal taxes are not good for, I mean, people don't like them. So I don't know. I think it's a neutral word. It doesn't really have a negative or positive. It means basically we match whatever somebody else does. Okay. So let's say that word together as a verb, 动词, to reciprocate. To reciprocate. And then it becomes a 形容词, reciprocal. Reciprocal. Okay. Taiwan likes this word a lot, I know from personal experience, because I'll give you an example. When it comes to 驾驶执照, right? Many people, if they want to, 外国人 want to come to Taiwan and exchange their license to drive in Taiwan, Taiwan will see if they reciprocate for a Taiwanese license. Meaning, can I take a Taiwanese driver's license and go to their country and drive in their country? Okay. And if they allow that, then Taiwan says, okay, we will reciprocate by allowing their drivers to drive in our country. So that's called, actually, that word turns into another word. It turns in, we call that as a, reciprocity. It basically means we exchange the same rights to each other. There is reciprocity between our countries. Yeah. I've never heard that. Yeah, but I think reciprocity is probably a better version of that. I'll give you another example. Taiwan likes reciprocity. If a Uyghur wants to come and buy a house or property in Taiwan, they need to show that their country, actually it's not their country, it's their state, allows Taiwanese to buy property and own property in their country. So let's say I'm from Bingzhou and I want to buy a house in Taiwan. I have to prove, now if it's already been proven before by somebody else, then it's okay. But if it has not been proven yet, I need a document from Bingzhou Zhou that says Taiwanese can own property in Bingzhou. And then they will extend the same. And it's funny because Taiwan does it state by state. They don't just say all 美国人. They just say which states offer the same rights to Taiwanese. And then those people from those states can own property in Taiwan. Or it could be anywhere else. It could be like a country in Europe. It could be a province in Canada. It could be anything, but they look at that. So yeah, it's called reciprocity. Okay. So yeah, so anyhow, here they announced reciprocal tariffs. So the idea, of course, behind this is if you tax us, we tax you. It's kind of like that. That's basically what it means. Now, of course, I think the U.S. has been calculating this in other ways too. They don't just look at tax rates. They look at other trade barriers. For example, they might, there are other trade barriers, right? What else? What are some other trade barriers? You can say, well, you can't bring your stuff into our country because we need to inspect it very carefully. And if we don't like this, we're going to reject it. So there could be other kinds of laws that ban products to coming into your country. And so that would be considered a trade barrier. Or another thing I know the U.S. government has looked at is the value of your currency, right? If your currency, your money is very cheap compared to the US dollar, that gives you a big advantage for trade, right? So if you artificially keep your currency cheap, that means that you're giving yourself an advantage to export to the United States, and it makes their products more expensive in your country. And what I mean is artificial means you push your currency down to keep it cheaper, so that we have a trade advantage. So I think these are some of the factors the U.S. was looking at when they talk about reciprocal tariffs against other countries. Okay. So anyhow, yeah. Let's read this together then. The U.S. on Wednesday last week announced reciprocal tariffs. Reciprocal tariffs against multiple nations worldwide. Worldwide. Including a 32% tax on Taiwanese goods. Okay, then it says here, now, very interesting little word here. It says, per the instructions of President William Lai, a negotiation task force has reached out to the U.S. regarding tariff negotiations, and Washington has responded affirmatively, stating that Taiwan is on the list for future tariff negotiations. The little word I talked about here is that very first word, per. What is that? Does anyone know what that means? It's not something we use a lot, but often you'll see this word in legal contracts, 合约书. What is? Yeah, according to. It simply means according to, 按照, according to something. So per the instructions of Lai 总统, right? So it means according to the instructions of President Lai. So it's not a word we see a lot, but when you see it, you might think, what's that word? What does that mean? Per, okay? But that's what it means, okay? So per the instructions of President William Lai, a negotiation task force, of course, their task, their assignment is to negotiate, right? To have a discussion, to negotiate. Everybody knows negotiate, right? You have to talk about something. Like sometimes even in our everyday life, we might negotiate. What's a kind of negotiation? We used to do this a lot in Taiwan, but we don't do it anymore. When you go shopping, what do we call that negotiation? To bargain, right? Now, bargain can be a 名词 or a 动词, right? We can say to bargain, okay? Haggle, actually, that's a good word. 讲价钱, right? Okay? To haggle, to bargain, okay? It's very funny because I haven't gotten this question recently, but years ago, many foreign friends, when they would come to Taiwan for the first time, they would ask me, they would say, can you bargain in Taiwan? And I would say, not really. I mean, maybe if you go to the traditional market and you want to buy, your bai cai or something, or kong xing cai or whatever, maybe you can bargain a little bit with them. But or maybe sometimes I remember sometimes when you go to sometimes like the 夜市 and you were buying some clothes or something, maybe you could bargain a little bit, but I don't think there was too much bargaining or haggling in Taiwan. But I know that some countries you're almost expected to bargain, right? When I went to China, I haven't been to China a long time, but I remember when I used to visit China, as soon as they saw I was a 外国人, I knew they would increase the price by like 100%, right? And so then I thought, okay, I would say how much, and they'd be like, like 200 renminbi, and I'd be like, okay, how about 80? And then they'd be like, maybe 150, and I'm like, no, how about 100? And then so we would bargain, we would haggle over the price. Okay, does everybody understand that? Now, of course, bargain also is a 名词, right? You could say that's a real bargain, right? If there's a sale and you think, wow, sometimes when I go to the supermarket, the 超级市场, and I'm looking at the prices, and suddenly I'm like, wow, that's a real bargain. I have to buy that. I have to confess, there's something I really like doing is if you go to the bigger, I hope this doesn't sound like a 广告, but when I go to the bigger 家乐福, they always have a bargain area. Have you ever seen that? Where they put all the stuff they're just trying to get rid of and they put it on sale. I love going to that place, and I'm always looking and thinking, what do they have here? Is there anything that's a real bargain? And sometimes it's really cheap. They're trying to sell something that they're just trying to get rid of, and the price is like maybe 50% off the price. So we can say I'm looking for bargains, or I'm hunting for bargains. Okay? What? Yeah. Well, and often I notice it's because the food is going to expire soon, right? It's almost near its 到期. It's but oh, okay, yeah, near expiration. And they're always like, oh, make sure you eat it in a week. And I'm like, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. I honestly think those they say best by, right? Best by, and they have a date. It means best to consume this by. I think those dates are very, very conservative, 很保守. So I'm not suggesting you do this, but I've eaten food that's way out of date and it's okay. It's no problem. So yeah. Okay, so let's say it together. To bargain. To bargain. To haggle. To haggle. Right. So yeah, haggle's that same idea. Haggle means to discuss the price with them, to try to push the price down. Okay. So anyhow, those are all kinds of negotiations, right? You're trying to negotiate. So a negotiation task force has reached out to the U.S. Reach out, of course, means you're trying to contact them. When you call somebody on the phone or you send them a message, you are reaching out to them, right? So sometimes you send a message to somebody and you say, I'm sorry, I want to reach out to you to ask you this question. It means I want to contact you. So reaching out means to contact somebody. Okay. So reached out to the U.S. regarding or about tariff negotiations, to discuss tariff negotiations. And Washington has responded affirmatively. And what does affirmatively mean? Positively. Okay. So we could say affirmatively or positively, means 肯定的, right? It's let's talk about this. Okay. So affirmatively, what would, of course, the opposite of that would be negatively, adversely. I don't think we would quite use it that same way. Maybe negatively. Yeah. So yeah. So why don't we say together affirmatively, affirmatively, positively, positively. So if you affirm something, what does that mean? AFFIRM. To affirm something means you say it's true, you say it's good, you say it's right. For example, if your friend makes a decision and they come to you and they ask you, they say, do you think that was the right thing to do? And you say, you affirm their decision. It means like, yeah, that was good. That's great. I'm glad you did that. It means you're supporting them. You're giving them positive feedback. You're affirming their decision. You're saying it's good. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So they responded affirmatively, stating that Taiwan is on the list for future tariff negotiations. Okay. So let's read this together. Per the instructions of President William Lai, a negotiation task force. Let's say it one more time. Negotiation task force has reached out to the U.S. regarding tariff negotiations. Negotiations. And Washington has responded affirmatively, stating that Taiwan is on the list for future tariff negotiations. Right, and notice this word, see, it appears 3 different times here. We have as a 形容词 and then as a 名词. So, yeah.
How do you know that certain countries manipulating the exchange rate of the currency?
I think you can easily look at how their banks work, their central banks, amount of money that they release into the, money. There's obviously the central bank uses certain tools to manipulate currencies. It's very common. I mean, different countries do it. So I think it's pretty easy to see what the central bank is doing to control the value of that term. Now, again, we say artificially change something. If the currencies will naturally go up and down too, right? But if you artificially keep your currency, you could either value your currency or you could devalue your currency to control the exchange rate to the US dollar or some other currency. So yeah, I think it's pretty easy to tell when a bank or a country is doing that. So yeah. And not Taiwan only, many countries are, but they call that, there's actually a word for that expression. We call that currency, yes, manipulation. What does to manipulate mean with an E? To control, right? If you manipulate somebody, it means you make them do what you want them to do, right? Sometimes we describe somebody as being very manipulative, right? you know, we've all known people. Sometimes we are manipulative too, right? But if you go to somebody, you're like, oh, I feel so bad. You know, I feel really, can you? And then you try to manipulate them into helping you, right? Okay. So some people, I mean, obviously we do that naturally, but some people are really super manipulative. They're good at manipulating other people. But currency manipulation means you control, you play with the currency to make it go up or down. You manipulate it. You control it. Okay? Why don't we say together, to manipulate. To manipulate. Manipulation. Manipulation. Currency manipulation. Right. Okay. Yeah. I have to say, recently I've been trading a lot of, I've been converting a lot of US dollars into NT dollars because it's so, the rate is really good, right? It's over 33, right? You know, so like this is good. I remember when it was like 28 or 29, you know, or something like that. So for right now, because the US dollar is very strong, it's actually good when you exchange your currency into other, or you travel overseas, it's pretty good. But I don't think the US government wants the dollar to be that strong. They actually want the dollar to be, they want to reduce the value of the dollar to help US exporters. So yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Exchange rate? NT dollar, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Goes up. Okay. Right. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the way that works with stocks, but yeah, there's many ways to bring the currency up or down. You know, of course, some currencies are fixed to the US dollar, like Hong Kong dollar, right? The Hong Kong dollar rate, the exchange rate to the US dollar has 10 years ago, it's the same as it was today almost, pretty much. So we call that a fixed exchange rate, where it's tied directly to the US dollar, which actually has made it very difficult for Hong Kong recently because it's been the US dollar has been very strong, which actually in some ways doesn't help Hong Kong. Yeah. Well, no, it's actually their government policy. They're just saying this currency will be fixed, tied to the US dollar at this rate. Well, no, it's a government policy. The government actually fixes that policy. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how a central bank works on that, but yeah, they may have to pump more money into the to currency to keep it up, or yeah. What? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Central bank, yeah. So yeah. Okay. So here it says, let's keep going here, a couple more paragraphs. It says the meeting with the US will not just be about tariffs, but will also touch on the issue of Taiwanese investments and purchases of US natural gas in Alaska, as mentioned by US Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. Lynn added. Okay, so not just about this, but it will also touch on the issue. Now, this is an expression we say, to touch on the issue means to touch on the subject, to touch on the topic. It means it will also include something, okay? Or, you might say, during your discussion with somebody, you might say, well, I'd like to also touch on this subject. I'd like to touch on this. It means I also want to refer to this or talk about this, okay? So we'll also touch on the issue of Taiwanese investments and purchases of U.S. natural gas in Alaska. Okay, so I guess they're a big producer of natural gas. Okay, so let's read this. The meeting with the U.S. will not just be about tariffs, but will also touch on the issue of Taiwanese investments and purchases purchases of U.S. natural gas in Alaska, as mentioned by U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. Lin added. What is a treasury? It's where your money is, right? Now, you could have a personal treasury, but it's usually we refer to it as a company or a organization or a government. It's where they basically keep all their money. It's not usually a place, but it's basically the idea of where our money sits, basically. What is the person who runs the treasury? We call them a what? A treasurer. So we take this and we add an ER. A treasurer is the person whose job it is in charge of the treasury. Like, for example, every organization, like Taichung Meiguo Shanghui, we have a treasurer, somebody who handles our money. They're in charge of our money. And it's different from the 会计师. It's not now the treasurer could be an accountant, a 会计师, but usually the treasurer is somebody who is supervising. They're in charge of. Maybe they hire or they ask a 会计 accountant to help them, but they are the treasurer. They may not be an accountant themselves. Okay, so why don't we say this word again? Treasury. Treasury. And then as a person, treasurer. It's a hard word to say. Treasurer. Yeah, that's the person who is in charge of the treasury. Okay. Okay. So it says here, Lin was referring to a report by Bloomberg. Report. Okay, that's kind of weird. Was referring to a report by Bloomberg. I think this is wrong. I think we should take this word out. It should be a report by Bloomberg in which this word is, extra. So I need to call Taipei Times and call their 编辑部. So it says, referring to a report by Bloomberg in which Bessent said, we will see what our trading partners offer. For instance, there is talk of a big energy deal in Alaska where the Japanese and perhaps the South Koreans and perhaps the Taiwanese would take a lot of the offtake. This is a very odd word. We don't use it very often. Offtake basically means their production. Yeah, it means what's coming out, like oil or gas, that we say offtake. But it's a very, very unusual word. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. But basically means your production, what you're making or what's coming out. I think it's more about some natural resource, okay? So, and what's this word, this expression mean? For instance means what? For example. So if we say, for example, for instance, okay, same idea. Basically, it's the same, exactly the same. Okay, so that's, again, when we read this, we won't say this word here. Okay, so let's read this. Lin was referring to a report by Bloomberg, in which Bessent said, we will see what our trading partners offer. For instance, there is talk of a big energy deal. Energy deal in Alaska, where the Japanese and perhaps the South Koreans, perhaps the Taiwanese, would take a lot of the offtake. Offtake. Okay. So it says here the executive yuan has made a list of industries in which the U.S. would like to see increased Taiwanese investment and purchases, Lin said, adding that the government is discussing how to decrease tariffs or resolve non-tariff trade barriers on vehicles, pharmaceuticals, and agricultural produce, Lynn said. Okay, so where are we here? It says, of course, we want to decrease tariffs or resolve, and this is what I was talking about, non-tariff trade barriers. These are things that are not tariffs, but they still stop somebody from bringing their products into Taiwan, for example. Okay, I'll give you a good example. Remember 2 or 3 years ago, the big discussion was about American pork, right? And people were talking about, Taiwan standards for ractopamine and all these things, right? So that could be considered a non-tariff trade barrier, right? If you say, oh, well, your meat has this chemical or this, and so we're not going to allow it to come in, they could say, well, that's a trade barrier. You're not allowing this product to come into your country. It could be other things. I mean, there's many, many, many other things. I heard many years ago in the 1980s, when Japan was trying to keep out American cars, they would inspect every car that came in very carefully. And if the car didn't meet these very, very specific standards, they would reject it. They would say, sorry, this car cannot come into Japan because it doesn't meet all these very strict standards that they put on those imported cars. So that would be a non-tariff trade barrier. Okay. So they want to resolve those on vehicles. Okay. What does vehicle mean here? Car. Now, keep in mind, a vehicle is actually a very broad word. We can actually use it for other things too. But usually it's meant with something that has wheels, like a car, a truck, a bus, a motorcycle. They're all vehicles. But vehicle basically is a way of transporting. It's a form of transportation. It's a way of moving something to another place. It's a vehicle. It's something that moves something from point A to point B. But usually when we say vehicle, we're talking about like something with wheels, like a car. Okay? So let's say together, vehicles. Vehicles. Yeah. No, but I've heard this word used for space. 太空, like a re-entry vehicle. Like, when you have the space station, right? And they want to send astronauts back to the Earth, they use we could call that a kind of vehicle because it's moving. But I don't think we use it too much for water, for sea. It's just, yeah. Again, 99% of the time, it's something that has wheels, like a car, or motorcycle, or bicycle. Even a bicycle would be a kind of vehicle. Okay, so what are pharmaceuticals? Yeah, basically drugs, right? Anything to do with medicine or drugs. What is it? 医疗. Yeah. So, pharmaceutical. We talk about the pharmaceutical industry, right? Sometimes we simply say the drug industry. Making drugs very profitable. So the pharmaceutical or the drug industry. So why don't we say it together? Pharmaceutical. Pharmaceutical. It's interesting. Sometimes they'll shorten the word to pharma. Like I know in America, when we talk about the really giant drug companies, we call that big pharma. It means the really giant, huge drug companies, and they make tons of money. So, every time you go to the hospital, right, and you need medicine, there's a good chance that your medicine was made by one of these or developed by one of these big pharma companies. Now, sometimes I know after the drug has been out for a while, other companies get the rights or they gain the right to make that drug, for a cheaper price. But usually it starts with big pharma. Okay. And then it says here, agricultural produce. Of course, agriculture, the word, right? 农业, right? Agricultural produce means anything that you produce, right? So when you go to the supermarket and you go to the produce section, it usually means you're going to go to the produce section. What do you buy in the produce section? Fruits and vegetables. Okay. I guess you could include meat, but often meat has another separate section. And if you go to an American make, 超级市场, there's another sign that you'll see for the meat products. Does anyone know what that sign is? Yes. So you see the sign for, it'll say Butchery. What does everybody know what this originally means, a butchery? What does a butchery do? Well, not necessarily kill the animals, but you cut the meat, basically. So what is the person who does that? They are a butcher, B-U-T-C-H-E-R, a butcher. So somebody who works with meat, okay? I used to know years ago a guy from Australia who was living in Taichung, and his job was he had his own company making his own sausages, xiangchang, and so I asked him, I said, how do you do this? How do you know how to do this? And he said, I was a butcher in Australia. So he learned how to make sausages. He learned how to cut meat, to make huotui and all that kind of stuff. So he was a butcher. Okay, but a butchery, if you go to a supermarket and you see butchery, that usually means the meat products. Okay, so why don't we say together, the person, a butcher, a butcher, and then as this part, butchery, butchery. Yeah, it's an interesting word. So anyhow, yeah, so technically, I think meat would be considered an agricultural produce or product. But when we think of produce, it's usually fruits and vegetables. Yeah, normally. I mean, we just think about that. Okay, so let's read this. It says, the executive yuan. This is, of course, the Xinzheng yuan. Okay, so again, the executive yuan has made a list of industries in which the U.S. would like to see increased Taiwanese investment and purchases, Lin said, adding that the government is discussing how to decrease tariffs. Decrease tariffs or resolve non-tariff trade barriers. Trade barriers on vehicles, pharmaceuticals, and agricultural produce. Produce, Lin said. Just small point. As a means, we say produce, right? But if you want to use it as a 动词, you say to produce, right? So produce, this word, the accent is on the first syllable, produce, okay? But normally if we say I want to produce something, then it's on the second syllable, to produce something. So the accent changes the way you say it. Produce here, and then to produce. Okay, so yeah, it's just pronounced in a different way. Yeah. Okay, I think we can go to a third story today. I just wanted to kind of go through that and see if there were any new words. But any questions on this before we move on? Yeah. No, I think it's different. I think it's more of a production sort of word. It doesn't mean takeoff. It's different from takeoff means like an airplane, take off, or something's going to take off, or to go somewhere, to make progress. But offtake is more about production. It's like your output. I think it's very similar to the word output. Okay, so when you go get oil, we talk about the output. Well, output could be used for many things. Electrical output, right? How much electrical power does Taiwan generate? We say the output of something, or it could be even like a 发电机, right? What is the output of this machine? I think offtake has more of kind of that idea. It's what's coming out of something, what's being produced from something. Yeah, but again, it's not a very common word. It's very rare. Any other questions? Anything else? Okay. Okay, so yeah, I just want to add something. I do think it's very interesting. I've been getting really frustrated watching TV recently, TV news, because I feel like a lot of people are just talking, but they don't really know what they're talking about. I think there's a lot of really, I think, earlier we talked about Donald Trump's Secretary of Treasury, Basant. I think you have to read those are the people who are making a lot of these decisions. I think you need to look at those people and see what their ideas are to understand really what he's trying to do here. And it's not as simple as it looks. I think there's a lot of other things going on here. But I do think, first of all, I think the U.S. has to do this because we are in bad financial situation. Our debt is crazy. And the last 3 presidents have basically kicked this issue down the road. Basically, we say kicked an issue, means we just put that issue off and we just keep borrowing more and more money. And you know, one of my friends was pointing out that in the next 6 months, the U.S. has $9.2 trillion of debt that needs to be rolled over. And we can either default on that debt, in which the whole U.S. economy just crashes. The U.S. dollar goes to nothing and everything falls apart. So I think Donald Trump's been given a really difficult job to fix a lot of these problems. And he's doing it but there's other things that he's trying to do here. One, I think he's trying to change, again, the whole global trading order. You know, the U.S. has changed the global trading order twice in the 20th century. In 1944 with Bretton Woods, a whole new trading order, and then again in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, the Plaza Accord with Margaret Thatcher, they changed the order again. This old order is, I don't think it's not working anymore. So they feel like we need to change that. And then again, I think another thing that Donald Trump is really trying to do is America desperately needs to reindustrialize. Our industry in the last 20 years has gone, and I don't know if you heard a vice president talking. He says one Chinese shipyard last year built more ships than the U.S. has built since World War II. One shipyard, okay? So this is really, you know, I think the U.S. is looking at this and saying we need to get our house in order industrially and, you know, economically and trade-wise. Of course, we want to balance trade, because if we don't, the U.S. is in big trouble. And I think that would come at the expense of China. China would take the advantage. And so right now, this is all part of a negotiation, but it's also part of a much bigger plan. And it is a trade war. I mean, it's like I told my friend yesterday, I said, it's like if like you woke up tomorrow and there was a military war, we would all have to, you know, sit tight and hold on and get through it. This is the same thing. There's a trade war between the United States and China right now. And I think this whole problem started back in 2001 when China was allowed into the WTO. I think it broke the global trading order. Now, of course, we hope that it would change China and make China a more democratic country, right? That's what we hoped back in 2001, but it didn't. Instead, I think China used that system to gain a huge advantage for itself globally. And so now we're seeing the result of that. So I think there's a really big picture of what's going on here. But I think when people just look at the surface and they say, oh, Donald Trump is this and this, I think you have to look at all the other things that are going on there. And one thing that strikes me is Donald Trump is obviously somebody who wants people to love him, right? He likes popularity. He likes people to flatter him, right? But yet, despite that, he's still doing this plan, even though he's being attacked by domestically in the United States and internationally. Of course, people hate it, right? They hate what's happening, and yet he's still doing it. So to me, that says there's something there that's going on that's he thinks this is extremely important to the United States, because even though it's not making him popular, he's still doing it. And even though there's a price to pay, he's still doing it. So I think I have my friends who are in the finance, and they've been watching this very carefully. I mean, another thing is I think the U.S., they actually want to bring the stock market down. They actually want to bring the stock market down. So money goes into the bond market and other things. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of things going on there. There's like at least 5 different big goals that are going on behind the scenes. But yeah, we'll get through this, you know. It's, yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. 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 Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think he's also trying to desperately reduce our surplus spending. That's why Elon Musk is going around cutting, you know, excess. But yeah, it's just I mean, I'm not saying this is everyone. This is a global problem, but it's also an American domestic problem. We really, really need to get our trade balance in order, and we really need to bring our deficit spending down. We're way too much money spending, debt. The debt is just going up and up and up and up. So yeah, it's an interesting situation. I mean, I know there's a lot of, I will say this, if you read about this or you watch stuff on TV or you go online, don't just get all your information from one source. I suggest you get your information from as many sources, because I mean, of course, this is my opinion, but I think there's a lot of garbage going around right now, people who are saying things that they don't know what they're talking about, right? And so I do think we need to look at this from many different angles. It's quite an interesting subject. But again, I think the one great thing that Taiwan has going for it is Taiwan has something that the United States desperately needs. And I'm not saying that's the only reason that U.S. supports Taiwan, but there's something that Taiwan has that the United States can't not replace, no matter how much they try, and that is its technology. There's no way you can just move that to the United States. So yeah. There's an article I wanted to look at real quick before we end today. Where are we here? Where is it? Here we are. Where is this? Okay. I don't know. Well, we probably won't have much time to talk about this, but I thought there were some good words in here. And it's not talking about tariffs. So. Okay. So here it says pollution. Ooh, they spelled that wrong. I need to call their BNG boo and talk to them. What's wrong with this word? There should be 2 L's, okay? So pollution, what is pollution? Well, air pollution is one kind of pollution. It's basically 污染, right? So there's what? Air pollution, what else? What are the air pollution? Water pollution, noise pollution, that's a big one. Yeah, what? Yeah, actually light pollution, we talk about it. Where there's too much light at nighttime? Yeah, or thought pollution, maybe, I guess we could say that. But yeah, so we use this word in many different ways. So why don't we say together, pollution. Pollution. And what is the 动词? To what? To pollute, right? So you just talked about something. Sometimes we say somebody's thinking has been polluted, right? To pollute means to pollute your mind with bad thoughts or with things that are not accurate or not good. Okay, so let's say that word together as well, to pollute. To pollute. Okay, so here it says pollution regulation divides Londoners. Okay, what's a Londoner? Right, people from London. So what do we call people from New York? New Yorkers. What do you call people from Taichung? Taichungers, okay. It's kind of a weird word, but I've heard that word used a lot, Taichungers, okay. I guess you can't say Taichungese, so it would have to be Taichungers, right? But it's funny, I guess, do people say Taipeiers? I've never heard Taipeiers. No, I've never heard any word for, or Kaohsiungers. I don't know if that's a word we use, but yeah. Yeah, actually, I've heard friends, they jokingly say Hong Kong people. I've seen this word, they call them honkies. Yeah, but actually it's spelled differently. It used to be a slur for white people in America, honky. But yeah, but I've seen that word used jokingly for people from Hong. I've heard the word Hong Kongers. Hong Kongers, okay? So yeah. Okay, so anyhow, this article caught my attention a little bit because, in Taiwan we talk about pollution a lot and how to control it. So here it says for Londoner, wow, this is a long name, Bo Boca Batista, air quality has drastically improved in the British capital following the rollout and expansion of a contested car pollution toll 2 years ago. Okay, so that's a person. It says air quality. What does drastically mean? Dramatically, what would be some other words? Tremendously, we could say significantly. Okay, so if something is very noticeable, noticeably, drastically, tremendously. Okay, so why don't we say together drastically, drastically, significantly, significantly. Okay, so it's drastically improved in the British capital following the rollout and expansion of a contested car pollution toll. Now, rollout means basically the introduction. If you begin a new plan, we say we are going to roll out a new plan. We're going to introduce a new plan. It's like to bring it out, to roll it out, okay? So we say a rollout of an expansion, it makes it bigger, of a contested car pollution toll. Now, what does this mean? It says this toll has been contested. What does contested mean? Yes, that's probably the best way to put it is disputed. It means that not everybody agrees with this. What would be the word we often use when people are debating something? We say it's very what? There's even a better word. Even closer. You're close. Controversial. Yeah. So, yeah, I think this would be the closest word. Controversial. Okay. So if something is contested or it's disputed or it's controversial, people do not all agree about it. Many people are arguing or debating over that. Okay, so let's say it together. Contested. Contested. Controversial. Controversial. Disputed. Disputed. Of course, if you have a dispute is a disagreement, right? D-I-S-P-U-T-E, a dispute. There's a dispute between him and me over something, right? We're having a disagreement, an argument, a dispute. Okay, so it says here, a contested car pollution toll, okay, 2 years ago. What is a toll? Something. Well, often we use a toll for what? Like a road, right? A highway. Not anymore because now there's an ETC program, but in Taiwan, they used to, on the Gaosu every so often, you have to stop your car and pay a toll, right? At a toll station, okay? Not just Pennsylvania. It started in Pennsylvania, but they use it in many places now. It's called oops. Let me write that again. It's called a turnpike. That's, sorry, T-U-R-N-P-I-K-E. Turnpike is a kind of gaosu that they charge toll for. Okay? So, technically, Taiwan uses the wrong word because it's not free, right? Freeway usually means, a freeway is supposed to be different from a turnpike. A freeway it's free, right? You go down and you drive and there's no money. So technically, turnpike would be a better word, or we could say a toll road or toll road for Taiwan's highway because you have to pay money to use it, right? You can't just drive on it for free, usually. But a turnpike it started in Bingzhou. It was the first one in America where they had a highway, really a nice highway, but you had to pay money to use it. So if you're and now there's other states that also use this term, but in Pennsylvania, every time I go home, you'll see on the Gaosu, it'll have a sign that'll say Pennsylvania Turnpike, and when you get onto that road, you have to stop at a toll booth and take a ticket to pay to go onto that highway. And all the other roads are free. They're freeways. Okay, so there's a difference. Why don't we say together, turnpike? Turnpike. Yeah, it's an unusual word. I don't think I've ever seen that word used outside the United States, only used in the US. Okay, so here they're charging a toll for cars for pollution. Basically, you're paying extra money for pollution that your car produces. Okay, I assume that's only for normal cars and not EVs. I'm not sure, but yeah. So let's read this together. For Londoner, Boca Batista, air quality has drastically improved. Let's say it again. Drastically improved. One more time. Drastically improved. In the British capital, following the rollout and expansion of a contested car pollution toll 2 years ago. Okay. Now it says, now Boca Batista, 21, feels like Londoners can walk down a high street and not cough as much. It's so much more evident that things aren't as bad as they used to be, said Boca Batista, who co-founded the Choked Up campaign group for young ethnic minority Londoners living in areas of high pollution. Okay, so he's actually, or she, I'm not sure if he or she is involved with this issue. So this person feels that Londoners can walk down a high street. Now, this is a very interesting term. High street is not a term that we normally use in America, but high street would be, does anyone know what that means actually? Yeah, it means more of a nice road, a nice street. Like a high street would be like a fancier street, a nicer road. It's not a term that we use in America, but it seems to be very common in the UK. In British, they talk about a high street, okay? What? Yeah. Oh, really? High street. Okay. I'm not really familiar with it. So yeah. I mean, it's not used much in America. So, and they say they can walk down the street and not cough as much. Of course, if the air pollution is very bad, people start coughing. So it's much more evident. So when we say something is evident, what does that mean? It's very clear. We can see it. It's obvious. It's obvious to us. It's much more obvious that things aren't as bad as they used to be. So if you can say, wow, it's evident that, it's going to clear up today or it's going to rain really hard, it means it's obvious. It's very clear. We can see this is going to happen. So said this person who co-founded, it means he founded something with others, the Choked Up campaign group. So this is like a group. It's called Choked Up. When you're choked up, it means when you're choked up, what does that mean? You can't breathe. Well, it could mean that too. So if somebody gets choked up, usually it means they're emotionally overcome. They feel very emotional and they can't talk. Sometimes I've been that. I've had that happen to me. Like you're talking about maybe you're giving a 演讲 or you're talking about something that's very 感动, right? It's very moving, and then you can't talk anymore because you get so emotional, right? Or maybe you feel like crying or something. So you say he was all choked up. But here this means something different. If there's too much air pollution, you start to feel like you cannot breathe, right? So you feel choked up, like you can't, the air is too dirty. And choke, you know what choke means, right? Choke means to strangle, so that someone can't speak or talk or breathe, to compress your neck or, yeah, I think you know. So why don't we say it together, choked up. Choked up. Right, so you can say I felt choked up or I got choked up. That means, or I couldn't speak. Okay, so Choked Up campaign group for young ethnic minority Londoners. So these are Londoners from different minority groups, like maybe like blacks or Indians or Asians, or I don't know, there's probably many different groups. Living in areas of high pollution, where there's lots of pollution. We say high pollution. Okay, so that, or we could say serious pollution. Okay, so let's read this. Now, Boca Batista, 21, feels like Londoners can walk down a high street and not cough as much. Okay, remember cough is with the F, so let's say it again, cough. Cough. Okay. It's so much more evident that things aren't as bad as they used to be, said Boca Batista, who co-founded the Choked Up campaign group. One more time, Choked Up campaign group for young ethnic minority Londoners living in areas of high pollution. Right. Does everybody know this word ethnic? It's a little bit different. Like ethnic, it could be racial related, but it's like it's like a more of a cultural group. Like we often talk about ethnic Chinese, right? Because we wouldn't say, I don't think we usually say Chinese is a race. You know, we could say Asian, the Asian race, right? But Chinese would be more like an ethnic group, an ethnic, like they have the same cultural background, right? So we say an ethnic group. So you might have different ethnic groups that have the same race, but they're different ethnic groups. So does everybody understand that idea? It's a word we use. So we don't say, it's not saying racial minority, because racial minority would be like based on race, but this is based on their ethnicity or their ethnic group, okay? So yeah, anyhow, I hope you understand that. And minority, of course, is a smaller, they're not the majority, they're the minority, okay? So yeah. Okay, well, unfortunately, I see we're out of time today, but we'll come back and have much more fun conversations later on. So I want to remind you about something. I don't know if any of you are interested in this, but if you are, I just want to mention it. On 4月29 20号, we have 19, yeah. We have a COMPASS DJ and food festival. Okay. We've never done this before. You know, every year we have the 国际美术音乐节 in the fall, right? But for the very first time, we're trying this, and it's a DJ and food festival. And I want to assure you that this DJ music is going to be for everyone. This is not just one of those hardcore. We want this music to be enjoyable for everyone, all ages. So it'll be 2 days, and it will be on, you know where 草悟道 is, right? Right in front of, you know where the new 洲际酒店 is? Right behind 青美诚品. We're right next on 草悟道, right near 洲际酒店. So if you go there from 12 to 9 p.m. on Saturday or 12 to 8 p.m. on Sunday, okay, there'll be lots of food, lots of good music. And so that's COMPASS. We're working on that. So yeah, come out and have fun. There'll be some good times there. So we'll see you then. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.